Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder and team leader of Streamlined Properties. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Have you ever wondered what type of person would have a potato shed, or a shipwreck house, or a hobbit house, or a fire lookout? Well, you're about to find out, because my guest this week is Kristie Wolfe, who specializes in handcrafted, one-of-a-kind experience stays. This is a short-term rental show, but also one that's built on creativity. You're going to love this show, and you're going to want to follow up with the links to see these properties because they are insane. You're going to love them, and you're going to love the show. I'm not even going to give you what you should do about subscribing. Let's just get to it now. This is episode 134 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Kristie Wolfe. Kristie built her first tiny house in 2011 as a social experiment for her own idea of living simply and deliberately. Now she is off on a journey where she's building handcrafted, one-of-a-kind experiences like, let me just give you a few examples before I let her speak, a treehouse in Hawaii, an underground hobbit hole in Washington, a fire lookout in the Idaho Panhandle, and a potato hotel in her hometown of Boise. And Kristie, where are you now? Because you're on site of something new right now. And welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm currently just left the inspector, getting ready to pour footings for a terrarium house. So it is a little tiny house inside of a greenhouse.
Oh, that's awesome. So let's go. You have a background in building though, right? Is that how you kind of got into this when you started this?
It's not really how I got into it. And I don't necessarily have a background. My mom always remodeled our houses. My dad was a school teacher, not really into the projects. Yeah. So I would say I was handy when I got started, had done some extensive remodels, things like that. But, you know, the tree house and hobbit hole, those were the first structures I was building from the ground up.
Oh, wow. Yeah. But it seems like, though, that was what your intent was, to really do this yourself. So you started out trying to do it for yourself. That was the first one.
Well, I wanted it to be a rental, but I didn't know if it would work because I didn't know anybody who had used Airbnb back then. Yeah. You know, we were still renting our vacation rentals out of like the thrifty nickel. And so I had no idea if it would work. I just really wanted to build a treehouse in the jungle. And so my thinking was, if this rented for 8 days a month, it would replace my current factory job. I worked at a plastics factory at that time. And then if it didn't work, my friends and family had a vacation home in Hawaii. So I thought it was a win-win situation.
Yeah, and that first property you bought sight unseen in the jungle in Hawaii, right?
Right. Yeah, I tried going on Google Earth and looking around, but it just looked like a jungle. And that's really what it looked like when I got there.
Yeah. I mean, was that enough for you at the price point that it was at? It just made sense to at least take the kind of modified risk on it.
Yeah, it was still more money than I had. The listing price was $8,000, and I called the guy up and we kind of hit it off. He was getting rid of, him and his wife were trying to retire at 40. At this time, I was about 30. And so they were selling off all of their excess things. And I had just done the whole tiny house minimalism experiment. So we were like really bonded on that. And so this was my first of many owner financing deals. I didn't even really know what it was called at that time, but he let me put $1,000 down, and then I paid him $200 a month, zero interest for the next 3 years. And the house was basically profitable 3 months in. I had made all my money back.
Wow. Where did you find the deal? Where did you first hear about it?
Craigslist. Wow. I actually, at a different factory that I had worked at, a mechanic or electrician that worked at that factory was telling me that he has a buddy that spends his winters in Hawaii. So I had never been to Hawaii, let alone been to this property before. And he said there's this area where they have really cheap land. So that had kind of just stuck in my mind for years. So when I thought, well, I really want to build a treehouse, I got on Craigslist and looked for land. And I mean, it was probably a 3-day from I want to do this to buying the land. And then I didn't go over there until 8 months.
Wow. Well, so what is it, though, about your personality and background that made you be okay with just taking 3 days to make a decision?
It's probably a disorder of some sort.
One that you're really working with well, though, as I see.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not really too concerned with risk. I mean, really, that is kind of the process that I still use today, even though my properties are getting bigger, is, you know, okay, this isn't going to ruin me forever if this totally went sideways. And then also, is this the fun thing that I want to spend the next, 6 months, year doing? And I kind of just go off of that and hope that the customers will be there, and knock on wood. So far, so good.
Yeah. And I'm sure as you moved forward, there were most of the properties you at least could see on Google Maps. This one was more of your worst case scenario is a very low down payment to have land in Hawaii, even if it's not usable.
Right. Yeah. So now I have gone to see everything before I've purchased it. But I would say typically I've kind of made my mind up before I've even got to it. And then I'm like, am I just convincing myself that this is great, or is this great?
Yeah, but I think now over time you've proven it to yourself, but you were kind of testing it on yourself originally. What's the allure for you to be more, at least in terms of a lot of your beginnings, a little bit more off the grid?
Cost, really. I mean, I like the environmentalist part of me loves being off grid. The part of me that hates when solar works until it doesn't, and then trying to get somebody to go work on solar if I can't get to it. That's a bummer. I've got really good at it now with multiple. I think half of my properties are off grid and half of them are in various states of, like whether they're hooked up to power, but maybe on a well, septics. So now I'm like pretty good at it, but really it's the cost of being out in these rural areas. And then it's just actually really beautiful as well.
I mean, in some ways, the pandemic must have fortified a little bit of what you had already been testing, because that was really a time where people wanted to get away and be far away from people, and also enjoy kind of that amenity of being off the grid or close to it.
Well, I kind of thought this scattered sort of business plan of building in all these different places. I'm on the road. I do about 60,000 miles in my truck every year, going to different places and being on a build. And I thought it was not very smart. But then when the pandemic did happen and different areas were shutting down, and Hawaii shut down for basically 2 years.
Yeah.
So it actually proved to be really smart in a global pandemic to have me be spread out and also remote.
Yeah, and I think at least one follow-up that I've seen is people haven't really backtracked on enjoying that now. It's like a more quieter pace. So have you seen that that's continued even after we're allowed out for the last couple of years?
Well, my places have always been like, I think I have a 97% occupancy rate. And so I didn't see it change a whole lot. I mean, there was the March, April of 2020, we were getting cancellations left and right. And I thought, oh, wow, this is the end. But then locals filled those in. My places aren't usually rented by locals. They're people flying in to go to my places. So that's kind of just remained the same.
Yeah. Has one of your, I guess, goals been to really, it seems to me, I looked at a bunch of your properties, there's not really competition for any of them. Like you said, that's why your occupancy rate is so high. They're so unique that nobody's thinking, hey, I'm going to make a potato hotel. That's just not on a lot of people's radar.
Right. Yeah. Somebody asked me if I would be interested in doing domes and different things like that. And I think they're really cool, but I think other people can execute it really well. And so with my finite amount of time, I want to really build things that I don't think other people are going to do. I recently did a shipwreck remodel of somebody built this house that's shaped like a ship in the 60s. And it was in terrible condition. And I was like, nobody else is going to fix this. Every other person will tear this down. And so I was like, I have to buy this.
Yeah, I had a look at that one and I was like, is this the before or after when I was looking at the facade? Because I was thinking shipwrecked and I was like, is it a current shipwreck? So that must have been a big undertaking. Is part of you really enjoy this kind of savior part of like, don't let this house go to waste. I can turn it into something great?
Oh, 100%. I love that. And I love like finding the story. So since I had bought that, I couldn't find anybody who knew anything about it. Somebody did a big YouTube video on like the part one build of it, and the family of who are probably like my age or older that grew up, their grandparents built it. And so the gentleman that actually built it is still alive, and hopefully I get to show it to him this year. But yeah, I just love that somebody took the time to do that for, not vacation rental purposes back then. And the idea that that would just like go away kills me. So yeah, I love that part of it.
Yeah, and it seems like you can continue the story into the future. Like that would be so cool to bring him back there to see it, but you're able to tell a story into the future, which now I think that not only have short-term rentals become more narrative based in terms of like the types of photography that are necessary and kind of what the experience that you're showing, but I think people enjoy the narrative. Like now there's a story. Who doesn't want to stay in a shipwrecked home? I mean, that sounds awesome.
Right. I recently took all my girlfriends to New Orleans and we stayed in an amazing house. And I couldn't believe that there was nothing in the guidebook that didn't say the history of this house because it was really eclectic, super cool. Definitely had been a commercial thing at one point. And I'm like, huge missed opportunity there.
Yeah, in New Orleans, yeah, for sure. That's got to be ghosts, brothel. There's got to be some
Right.
story there. And you're right, though. I think that as someone who's really, haven't stayed in hotels in 20 years. I've only stayed in short term or midterm rentals. I really like the story when I get there. I also want the properties that you're making. Like to me, that's more interesting. If I'm going to go away, why do I want to go to just some cookie cutter house when I can go to something that's completely unique?
I agree. And something that I've done that I think just helps with the overall reviews and everything is I put in like a Shutterfly book of the build or remodel to show that like, oh, I'm the human that did all of this and poured everything into that. And I feel like that gives you a lot of grace with people if anything did come up during their stay. Another thing that I do in the guidebooks is I have a page dedicated to the caretakers, the people that clean it and take care of the properties. And, Airbnb has such a stigma with cleaning fees. And I'm like, but at the same time, it's the same people who want these people to be paid well, And so I think showing them that, hey, these are the people that live down the road that totally take care of this. I never have any complaints about cleaning fees. They often leave extra tips for them, just like bringing in the human side of those unique builds helps too.
Yeah, and I love that you're putting the actual build part in there because I feel like that provides a connectivity for the guest. And then they're going to treat it more like, wow, okay, wait, Kristie really did this. I was talking with Bill Faith on a prior episode in short term, and we were saying like people want to hide everything in LLCs, but your biggest connector is showing who you are, like being the host or being the co-host. So they have a real person-to-person connection. That's much. If you rent from an LLC, you're really not going to care as much about it, no matter how cool it is. Do you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. Even if it's like a big property management company or something, I definitely am probably internalizing things when I stay versus if it's, Molly that I'm staying with, versus
Yeah.
a company.
Yeah, and also in the reachability, which goes to the care of the property, you're creating such unique properties. You want people to have a certain amount of care with it, especially if they're off grid, things can happen. It's not as easy to just hop into town. So by giving them that kind of one-to-one connect, I think they're more likely to reach out if something's a little bit off. Have you had that experience as well?
Yeah, the most feedback that I get from like those books and stuff that I have is people just being really impressed because they wouldn't otherwise know, really. They see a pretty place that they want to stay, and then they'll be like, I can't believe you did this yourself. That is so cool. It's that sort of thing versus if they just stayed there, they would have thought, well, somebody built it. Somebody with a construction crew built it, instead of seeing like, oh, no, it was me or me and my mom out here every day.
Yeah, and again, I really think that goes to a level of attachment to the whole project, but also when then they find out that you have other unique stays, you may get, like you said, you're not the local visit for people who are local. So now people may say, well, I stayed in, Kristie's treehouse. Like, what else does she have? Are you finding people going to different properties just because they like the way that you do things?
Yeah, I have a handful. I'd probably say maybe only like 6 or 7 people have stayed at all of my places. So
That's awesome.
once they found out that, it was the same person, because when we, send our message that says, thanks for staying, please leave us a review, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, P.S. I have these other properties that you can check out. And then people will usually reply and be like, oh my gosh, the Hobbit hole was also on my wish list. I can't believe this is the same person, because nobody books it knowing who I am or any of that story beforehand.
Right.
So then some people have made it a thing. And I actually had these enamel pins made that represent each property. And so we have been sending them out to people that have stayed at all of them or are really close to staying at all of them, just as like a fun little extra thing.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking in my head that the people who are like completing the cycle are like trying to do the thing where they have like you drink 100 beers at a bar and they stamp the thing and then you get some giant
it's like a
beer
passport
stein
situation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so let's go over the logistics though of building these really on your own or with very limited help. How did you start with that and how hard has it been, especially when you're doing it more off grid? Because then you're talking about hauling materials to the site, which is always a little bit different.
Yeah, and I am a weak little girl. So basically all day it's just me trying to haul things that I can't haul. It'd make for a really boring TV show. But every project, I end up doing something completely different than the last one. And that's just because that's what interests me. So they all have their different challenges. And because they're so remote, sometimes I would like to, especially in the position that I'm in now, hire people, but I can't even get people out where I am. And then a lot of times people are impressed with how quickly I'm able to do things sometimes. And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't have to wait for the drywaller and then
Right.
have to wait for them to be done for the painter. I can just do it all. And so even though it's me working all day, every day, sometimes it goes quicker than if that was all piecemealed and I was just general contracting it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, physically, though, how difficult was it in the beginning compared to now when you kind of know the systems and know how to get stuff different ways to different places? I mean, not a lot of people are just going to get a treehouse up and think it's going to be safe right away. How did you figure that out?
So I don't think that getting the materials or physically anything has gotten easier. With the experience, what has gotten easier is the permitting, like knowing how to do zoning and permitting and stuff. That has got much better because I didn't know anything about how to go about any of that at the beginning. So that part's much better, but still my properties are just in such crazy places that typically Home Depot is like 3 hours away. And so you've got to be really deliberate with your lists because you can't just run back to town for screws,
Right. I'm sure you have like a subset of stuff that I always need on hand, so you have that. But yeah, like you said, you can't miss out on a shortfall, the drywall, and then have to go back 3 hours. That would be a little bit crazy.
Exactly.
What are the timelines for what are you working on now? You're working on the terrarium. So what's the full timeline for rebuild or construction on this one, just so people have an idea?
This is something I know better than to give myself timelines now. On average, with my smaller places, it's taken about 3 months of construction, but then it always ends up taking longer. So I'd say from like start to finish, it's probably more like 9 months to launch. But a lot of my places, I've been interrupted with winter. And so then I can't work on it. I have to take a break and come back in the spring. So the terrarium that I'm working on, I'm just doing what I can. And there isn't a real, like, I have to have it done by this time. But I'm working on it now because I can't get into my property Moon Pass Lookouts, which is my major build this year. So for the next month or two, I'm kind of doing what I can here with this one. And I'll have to bail on it and head up north.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that one. So what's the one that's going to take? That's not you already did a lookout tower. That was in the beginning, right?
Yes, I bought a 1959 original fire lookout tower, and I did that in 2017. And so I restored that. I ended up learning everything about fire lookouts, and I really wanted to build more. And then my big vision is to have a museum. And so I always thought I'd do it in the town where Crystal Peak Lookout is, but I haven't been able to buy enough land or anything like that. Well, then I was traveling through Wallace, which is another city up north, and it's only about 30 miles as the crow flies, but it's about an hour and a half drive from property to property. And that's where like the big burn of 1910 and kind of launched fire lookouts. That's where it started, is in that town. There's a famous firefighter called Pulaski, and the Pulaski tool that firefighters still use today is named after him, or he invented it. But the trail where he hid his men in a mine and saved them all, he made them stay in there at gunpoint while it filtered in all the smoke. That's only about 2 miles away from my property. So, and It's really beautiful now, it's a huge forest. So I'm building 5 glass roof fire towers. So they look traditional, but there's like a little spin on things. The floor plan is the same as my Crystal Peak. And then I'm going to build the part 2 of that is building a museum that's like open to the public. So that's my big project. I raised money by pre-booking on Indiegogo. So that one does have a timeline. We have people that have reservations in September. And so I'm doing everything to try to be prepared. But, you know, everything does go wrong with construction. And so there's only so much I can control.
Yeah, well, I mean, on those, you know, the general layout. It's really, if you're building from scratch, getting the footing correct and then making sure you're building the progression obviously goes up for anyone who knows fire towers. I've only been on one fire tower and I'm like a little bit scared of heights, but the views are insane and it really feels calm up there. You can see everything. So I imagine having a see-through roof is really going to be amazing for stargazing. I think that was one of the main points that I saw on the Indiegogo.
Yes, and it'll be smart glass. So when those summer months that are hotter, you'll be able to make that fogged and kind of block out the sunlight from beating in on you like a magnifying glass.
Yeah. So you're building 5 of those in the same location, and then they'll all hopefully will launch around the same time.
Yes, that is the plan. I have to have minimally 3. I'm building 5 so that hopefully the 3 we have allowed for our Indiegogo guests to book, and then 2 that would be cash flow to be able to cover all the costs.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about a couple of the other properties because these are really unique. And I just think that I think that if people have vision, like super creative vision, they can put it to work. I mean, these things that you're doing are maybe things that when short-term rental started, they said, well, why would somebody do that? Until you realize, well, I would want to do that. That sounds cool. Where did the Hobbit house come from? Because that's awesome. And is it really a Hobbit house? Like, are you standable at 6 feet? I didn't look through the whole thing, but I love the way it looks.
While the door is 5'6", the round door, inside at the peak is about 9 feet. So you can fit, but I built everything to make you feel small. So the bed is really elevated. The lantern light fixture is really big. So no matter how big you are, you'll feel kind of small inside of there.
Yeah.
Well, it's twofold. I'm not a Lord of the Rings Hobbit person until after I built it. But I was obsessed with the house from like the time of being a little kid. And when we were building the treehouse, my mom was helping me and she just hated being on the ladders, and everything we had to do was on a wobbly ladder up high. And I told her, don't worry, next time I'll build inside of the mountain. You won't have to get on the ladder. And so I just really wanted to build that structure and I knew that I was going to be dealing with real fans as guests. And so I took that seriously. And even though I listened to the books while I'm building and stuff, I would go and research everything. So I built it as if the hobbit that lived there was a carpenter. And so there's a lot of intentional thought, because the thing that I see other hobbit holes do is, one, they're not in the ground, which I feel like is key, or they have what looks like a round door, but it's just a rectangle door that opens. I wanted everything to, even though the picture looks right, it might not feel authentic when you're there. I needed the big door to swing open. And so I was doing a carpenter hobbit, and what a carpenter hobbit wouldn't have would be like figurines of Frodo in his house, you know? It would just be like a real person lived there. And so one of the things I wanted to have was like a cuckoo clock that looks like hand carved and everything, but I didn't know if there were clocks. I couldn't quite recall. So I'd get on Reddit to these fan groups and be like, hey, is there clocks in, you know, Hobbit land? And people would be like, yes, on page 360, so-and-so calls to so-and-so with the time and things like that.
Of course, they knew right away.
Totally. And so, yeah, I would just like fact check everything, because typically with that one, which is really interesting too, somebody is buying it as a gift. I would say this is probably 80% of my guess for the Hobbit lover in their life. And so that's kind of been fun to do and have people, you know, wear costumes and just take it to a whole nother level.
Yeah, and one thing I was thinking before, and this just popped up again in my head, that a lot of these things, because you have Instagram channels for each one, but I would suppose they're so unique that your clients are the ones who are really going to propel a lot of future direct bookings just from them sharing what they're doing at your properties. Have you seen that in terms of who's coming and where they're coming from?
Yes, most of my social media is just me reposting other people's videos. And then we recently just did a bunch of TikToks, and we didn't realize that we had all this content already. People have been putting them out. And as good as the TikTok algorithm is, it hadn't even been showing me my own properties. So I was like, it must not be that great.
Yeah.
But I haven't tracked anything to know that, you know, oh, so-and-so stayed here and then I'm booking it. But I think that's probably the case.
Yeah, I mean, just on the shareability and the uniqueness, it just seems that people would tell their friends. And if we just take the Hobbit house, if you have people who are into Lord of the Rings and then they say they stayed there, they're going to tell everybody else on the message board. These are just smart business decisions that I think people could overlook if they looked at it as a one-off. But let's talk about the Potato Hotel, because this one is so interesting. How did you come up with that idea? And if someone's out there and they're saying like, it's just so different, this is something that people want to stay in. That's what I'm assuming.
Yeah. Well, so the Potato was my fourth Airbnb, and it has become my legacy for good or bad. That is the thing that I'm most well known for. But I thought, you know, my other places are in beautiful locations, just really stunning. And I thought, this is a Potato. It's going to just be something that I want to do. It's going to not rent as well. I'm going to have to charge less. And then mind blown at how many people love it. So right after I had purchased the property in Hawaii and was working at the recycling plant, my friends sent me a job listing for being a spokesperson for Idaho Potatoes. And you traveled around with a semi truck with this giant potato on the back of it. And you just go to different events all over the country. They sent it to me as a joke because I'm such like an Idaho ambassador. And I was like, oh, I'm absolutely going to try to get this. So I was a spokesperson for 2 years. I actually went and built the treehouse during my off season between both tours. So the Potato was only supposed to go on the road for 1 year. It's concrete. It's 12,000 pounds, but it's still on the road today. So it kept getting requests to come back out. And so when I went, I thought, well, they're retiring this thing when we're done. And so I started planning in my head that I'm going to make it, and I'm going to put it in my backyard out in the field in Idaho. And I'm going to make this into an Airbnb. Well, it took probably about 6 more years until they actually retired it to upgrade to a more roadworthy fiberglass one. It's also a lot thinner, so you don't have to have oversized permits everywhere you drive. And so when I got wind that they were actually going to retire the old one, I still had a relationship with the Potato Commission, and I just like sent a quick video. I was headed to a property to do some maintenance, and I sent it to the president and said, hey, what are you guys doing with that thing? I think I could make it into something really cool. And so he had me come and present. Luckily for me, the Hobbit Hole had just been featured in like Money magazine, like a dentist office magazine. And he had seen it that same day. And he was like, well, maybe maybe it could be. So I went and presented to the commission, which are shippers and growers, and they unanimously voted to give it to me. And I remodeled it. I added a silo with this like really cool spa bathroom. And we have like an amazing like Jersey cow that lives out here that she's probably more popular than the potato now. And when we first launched, the commission has a company who like tracks every time Idaho potatoes is mentioned in the news or newspapers. So that first week that I launched, they had the data to say that that was worth $2 million in free publicity for them. And it's the gift that keeps giving. We are constantly still doing promotions, and Airbnb featured it on its national ad for a long time. So it was a good decision.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, it's just so cool. And there are so many different intertwined things where people are benefiting. There's multiple win-wins in that strategy. But I can just imagine the first conversation. You know that 12,000-pound potato? I want to turn it into a short-term rental. And your traditional people on that board be like, what'd you just say? Like, how is this going to work? And then look how well it's worked.
I mean, yes. And I was skeptical too that it would do so well, but you would not believe, lots of people come with their pugs named Potato. That first week I had a gal that was like, I'm having a potato themed 25th birthday, and come. And we've had scientists or people from Ireland come stay in a potato. It's been so bizarre. Never could have predicted it. So that's kind of just like leading with what I find fun and hoping that other people, like it too.
Yeah, I'm worried, though, that some listeners may try to do a spinoff and they're thinking what other large type of ground fruit vegetables they can do. So
Right.
If you see some oranges pop up or a cucumber home, we'll know that they figured it out here from you. Hey, this is Jonathan. Thanks for listening to another episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. On this brief interlude, I wanted to tell you that we have a mailing list. I actually don't love mailing lists. There's so much. This is not an automated mailing list where you get on a drip campaign. These are written once a month, will eventually be at once a week again by me, direct, and they're not spammy. So if you want to sign up for our mailing list, you can go to bit.ly/streamlined with a D mail. Bit.ly is bit.ly/streamlined mail. See you there. So what about the cocoon cottage? That looks really interesting. Was that a prefab that came like that, or that the plans were set up for that?
It was a prefab that I had them leave raw on the inside so I could customize it. It came from Estonia. I was doing the shipwreck house. I was going to be pushed out of there for the winter. And so I thought, what will be so easy is having a prefab. I'll go handle that in the winter and come back. Of course, that's not how things work. So while the prefab did make construction easier, when it launched, so it was originally supposed to be $6,000 in shipping door to door and take 30 to 45 days. It ended up costing me nearly the amount of the building itself, around $50,000 to ship it.
Oh, wow.
And it took
That's
9 months. It set sail right as the port in the Suez Canal got blocked by that ship. And so it's just bad luck. And then all of the supply chain issues happened right after that. And so, I've given up on trying to predict anything.
Yeah. Okay. So, Kristie, what's on your wish list? I mean, you've really cleaned out a lot of these unusual properties. What are your top 3 wish lists that you want to do next or are in the I know you're at the terrarium, but what else is on your radar?
Yes. I don't know that I want to give too many of them away. I have land to build a whole hobbit village. Whereas I think that a lot of the properties, people ask why I don't do multiples, because that would be so much better financially. But in cases like the Hawaii treehouse, almost everybody that's staying there is on their honeymoon. So I think it detracts by having a house right next door that those people are on their honeymoon too. However, the Hobbit house, I think when you create a village with all of these places, and I can give each one a different craft, a cobbler, a medicine woman or whatever, then I think it actually makes the experience more enjoyable. So I have land for that. I don't know when I'll break ground because the Moon Pass lookouts is going to take probably the next 2 full summer falls of my life with the museum.
Yeah.
And then I have like a list of builds and then a list of places that I really want to be. But the reality is, when I was traveling around with the potato, I went everywhere, every state, every small town, big city. And so there's places that I really love. Like I love Portland, Maine, but I don't know if I'll
I love
actually
it so
build
much.
there. Yes,
Yeah.
it's so cute, and the little islands, but it's so far away that I don't know that I'll actually do it with now knowing the amount of time I spend at my past properties. So we will see.
Well, let me throw out a couple things that I'm obsessed with and see if you have the same level of psychosis that I do. So one is high schools or elementary schools. I've seen a couple people do them. I'm obsessed. It's obviously a large scale project, but for me, it's like I kind of just want a full court basketball court and a gym in there. And I think they can be so cool. I'd like a small one to turn into a single family. Are you pro or con on that one?
I'm totally pro. I don't know if you're familiar. I'm going to get everybody, your audience is going to kill me for not like knowing the name, but it's like McLevins or something like that in Portland. Are you familiar with this? They take old schools. Okay. It's so cool. You got to look it up. I'll look up the name and send it to you afterwards. But they have multiple schools in the Portland area that they've redone. And so they'll have like the principal's office and make it into like a cigar room. One of the schools has the pool. They'll have like the boiler room be like a steampunk bar area. So super cool. And then classrooms are just hotel rooms. So they've done like an amazing job. They have multiples. I love it. It's too big of a project for me to do with my attention span. So even the shipwreck house is the first single family home I've done, but essentially it was like doing 3 houses because there's 3 completely different levels. Everything is wonky in there. It was super fun, but it took so much time. So when I see these like cheap, beautiful homes or castles, I'm like, I would love that, but that would take too much of my life to do.
Yeah. Okay. So now I have another one. How about a firehouse? That's on my list as well. Can be a small structure. It has the pole, so it's definitely unique. And the kitchens are usually very big, so there's an option there. What do you think about that one?
I would love to live in one. I think it would make a great rental. I think they're amazing. The little one-room schoolhouses, the little churches. I love all of those.
I love churches too. Yeah. Churches I think are great because they're so wide open just from how the spaces are laid out. They kind of look a little bit like what now is popular with the barn dominiums just because it's like one giant room. But churches always have all these other little extra areas that I think could be cool for what you were saying before.
If you're thinking of it for a family to live in versus a short-term rental, you do have to take that into consideration because it would need to be like a chapel, a small chapel for you to make it into an Airbnb, or else you do have this huge space. What are you going to do with it? Unless it's big enough to host, like you're going to have family reunions there, you know? So those spaces usually end up being like wedding venues, which is also something that I have with my brother. We restored a 100-year-old barn that is a wedding venue, but it really wouldn't make sense as like a Airbnb or a rec room because it's so large, but it's a great wedding venue.
Yeah. Over your time though now on doing all these short-term rentals, what do you think the most important thing for somebody new who wants to get into unique stays is? What do they need to know based on your experience? Because you really started just trying to figure it out on your own. What are some top tips for people who maybe have some skills to get into it, but what should they look out for?
Yeah, I think when you're looking for land, you need to figure out how you're going to get water. And that can be a lot of different ways, but to think that you're going to collect rainwater in anything less than a rainforest, it's not doable. You'd have to have such a large container, especially if you're having guests. They don't just conserve water than if you were going to live there. Power's fairly easy. You can have generators, you can have solar. That's pretty simple, but you have to figure out how to do the water. At the Hobbit Hole, we have a water truck come fill up. It's a big 2,000-gallon poly tank, but it looks like it's the village water tower. I wood clad the whole thing, so you can't tell. But I thought that I would just be able to get a water truck to come deliver. Not the case. Doesn't exist in Washington. So I actually found an excavation company that has a water truck to like put down water to keep the dust down during construction. Oh, yeah. And so they come up every 2 weeks and fill up our container. So there are creative solutions, but I'd say that's the biggest thing. Also, septics and toilets are pretty easy to figure out a way around. So I'd say That is the case for the land, and you can get remote, but you do need to think about, how is your guest getting there? Are they flying in, and then do they have a drive? And where are you pulling, your caretakers from? Is there any semblance of a city? I mean, I have places that are in towns as small as 400 and completely isolated and have made it work, but you really need to create a destination. And the thing that I would say, I don't want to offend anybody, but like when I'm looking, I find lots of really cool places, tree houses, A-frames, lots of fun things. And I prefer to stay in those unique properties too when I'm on the road. The thing I will say is a lot of their interiors that are well done, they're just a modern, nice interior that everybody has in their suburban home. And so I would try to think about being more intentional with your interior design and not just doing, whatever is popular right now and nice, because from the inside, these places don't look unique at all. They just look like a nice condo somewhere.
Right.
So I try to include things like I won't have a Keurig in my places, even though we have coffee.
Yeah.
I might do an antique coffee grinder with some pour over things. Like, how can you make every little thing different than what you're used to at home? That creates more of an experience while the person is there.
Yeah. On that note, though, and I know just from years, I've done short-term rentals for more than 20 years as well. Do you find that even though you've told people that this is an experience, do you still get that like subset who is like, well, there was no coffee maker. It's because they just didn't know how to work a French press or something?
We get very few. I think our listings kind of self-select.
Yeah,
We make it be like, this is an adventure. All of my places are off of dirt roads. So on every single one of them, we say rough roads lead to beautiful destinations. And we're priming them the whole time. And if somebody messages and says like, hey, well, the treehouse looks like it's in the middle of the jungle. I'm traveling alone. Is it scary? I'm going to say, I don't think it's scary, but probably not for you, or I'm afraid of heights. How tall is it? And I'll say, probably not a good fit. I don't ever try to convince somebody that they should be there. And if they're already bringing up the problems, we just kindly say like, oh, I don't think that you'll like it. It is roughing it, even though for me, it's not roughing it at all. And most of our people will say like, you couldn't even tell that you were off grid. This was incredible, but we don't want to convince anybody to stay there. There's plenty of people who want to.
Those are great points and answers. And I think it does all come down to this description. I always learned that any feedback I got was something that if it was really important, I needed to put it into the description, when you just launch one, because you're like, wow, that's a really good point that someone made. And like you said, when you're very intentional with your full listing, saying like, this is off the grid, you're not going to have these things, then you're at least level setting them. Their expectations are set the correct way. So like you said, there's very few people who weed through. It's usually like one partner who didn't know how off grid it was going to be. It's like, surprise, honey. And they're like, well, I thought we were going to like a tennis resort. So
totally.
And then you just want the good one to write the review.
Yes. And I would also say that like, if somebody has some criticism or whatever, there's at some point with thousands and thousands of reviews that you just got to know, okay, they were bickering during their vacation. I can't do anything that it was the bad weather or whatever, and not feel like, well, I have to change everything. I see this in the wedding venue industry a lot, where the contracts will just have pages of rules because one time somebody threw up in that trash can. Like, you don't need to make a broad rule for a one-off. And I think as hosts, we can get like, oh my gosh, this thing happened, and now I need to put up a sign for it. And I always say, if there's a sign, it's probably bad design. Like, can you design this so it's more straightforward so you don't have to have a sign describing what you need to do here?
Yeah, you made another good point, though, that it was my experience when we first started that really anyone who asked questions after we knew that we had everything in the listing, we would just decline because they were just clearly not right for the property. But I think that's a really smart thing to do, is to just really be able to say, you know what, I don't think this is the right property for you. I just don't want you to have a bad experience. Someone who's afraid of heights should not be going to a treehouse. It's just because you won't know till you get there. So, I mean, what are you going to do?
Yes. And we just like to put it on us. Like, oh, I don't, it is rough. I don't know that you'll really enjoy that, and do away with that.
Yeah. I think if somebody opens up the conversation, it's okay to make it seem, oh, it's so off grid. Meanwhile, it's,
Totally.
30 feet up a dirt road, but you just know
wild
that's
animals, the whole thing. If you're not comfortable with that, you probably don't want to stay. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome, Kristie. Where's the best place for people to get in touch with you? I know we have your website, which is KristieWolfe.com, and that's KristiWolfe.com. What about Instagram and other sites? Because your Instagram is quite popular, and you have all of your other listings are on your Instagram as well, so they can check them out.
Yeah, all my socials are Kristie May Wolfe, I believe. And depending on if I'm on a build or not, it will depend on how quickly I respond.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, you can find Kristie on Instagram at Kristie May Wolfe. And then if you go down in her bio, there's all the links to all of the different unique stays. I really appreciate your time. I know you navigated from your car to inside during this, but I really appreciate it. Glad to have you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. That was really fun.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. That was Kristie Wolfe. I'm Jonathan Green. We'll see you next episode. Wait, you have reached the end of the show. This is the part where you're going to get ready to check out, but I've actually changed this part. For over 120 episodes, you heard the same thing. Well, now I've changed it. I've thought about doing intros to the next episode, but I'm going to hold off on that for now. These are my pitches at the end. I've got nothing to sell you at all, but I do want to remind you that it really would help us if you support the podcast in the right way. All that means is subscribing to the podcast so you get it on Monday and Thursday, writing us a 5-star review if you believe that we deserve a 5-star review, sharing it with your friends, and being a participant in the Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing community. Soon there's going to be a new website launched. Maybe when you're listening to this, it's already going to be out there. That's where we're going to have collaboration. You're going to be able to see a lot from the guest. It is coming soon, and I just want to tell you, from me to you, I don't know how I got here, over 100 episodes. I'm so appreciative of you listening to the podcast and especially sticking around to hear this part. We'll see you next episode.